What's going on, guys? This is the Buried in the Bones podcast. This is episode 11. And today what we're going to talk about is kind of like the psychology of pain and the return to play. And that can kind of encompass a lot of things. That can be, some of you guys involved are in sports. I know we got some baseball players and some jiu-jitsu practitioners in here, football players, ex-professional athletes, as well as just some folks who are in the military world, or they're kind of in the law enforcement / tactical athlete realm. And then there are folks who are just beginning their fitness journey and they're interested in getting started, one. And then two, some folks don't have their sport, but life is their sport, right? So if we take away kind of like the arbitrary aspect of sports and just approach life, if you have a body, you are an athlete, and the way we approach things in our day-to-day, that certainly is our sport, man. We got to perform well, and we got to take care of ourselves. And it does seem, I heard this term, but pain-free performance doesn't exist, and we're all human beings, and we're all going to experience pain at different levels and different circumstances. And how do we approach that? Well, first, I think I'm a great example of navigation through pain, because if you know me, you know that I have had an extraordinary amount of just really annoying injuries. And so, where do I begin? Man, I suppose it started with football. I originally was in high school, and my injuries at the time, overtraining is a thing, I suppose. And when you're at that time was a not very well funded football program, you play both sides of the ball pretty frequently. And I had tons of injuries, man. I had like Achilles tendonitis once. I tore my meniscus. I had a ton of concussions, which ultimately was a reason why I stopped playing. And I remember just how annoyingly uncomfortable I was almost all of the time. In addition to that, I started wrestling, and with football, I was probably 190 pounds, and then with wrestling, I bumped down to 170 to 155, and that was hard and very challenging. And of course, you don't have a lot of nutrients in your body. You have less ability to recover, and thus you will have a big stress demand and very low recovery, which almost always ends up having some very annoying injuries. But I think the most important ones are, I've mentioned the rim to rim the rim. We're going to forego that today, and I'm going to get into my jiu-jitsu experience. So my experience as an athlete, theoretically, after, I would say, sanctioned sports, I got into another one, jiu-jitsu. It is, man, I love it. I think it's a fascinating sport. It brings art back to your life. It has nothing but movement problems and articulate ways to have certain pressures implemented on you. You learn how to navigate someone else through other pressures, and then you somehow find a way to submit or win, theoretically, this little matchmaking chess game, but with your physical body. It's fascinating. I love it. It is awesome. However, the issue is it's very hard on your body. It is absolute joint manipulation, as corny as it may sound, submission-based grappling, meaning one person's goal is to get the other person to essentially submit, right, at the most root form of giving up or accepting defeat. It's awesome. You get to be a player. You get to learn how to play a game, and you get to use your own skill set and your own physical body to work to your advantage. And everyone has their own ailments and their own movement restrictions, and they all have to find ways around them and use their body the best way it can be utilized for the sport. But when I first started, I was pretty much injury-free. It was great. And then, I moved out to Phoenix, got involved a little bit out there. I probably had 2 years of grappling experience at that time. And then I was kind of off and on. When I moved back to Nashville, I got involved with an amazing group of guys at Artista Jiu-Jitsu. And if you're listening, love you guys. and I'll be back soon. But I got involved pretty heavily as soon as I got here. I started immediately competing and going back and training real hard. It was awesome. I love it. It just something about just like being you and navigating this kind of spiritual like root human being thing of competition is awesome, man. But with the competition increase in my life, I started getting small little injuries, but it really wasn't until my first competition here in Nashville. I ended up doing very well, actually. And I came from a wrestling background, and jiu-jitsu by nature is a totally different sport, totally different game, totally different moves, different ways to win. And ironically, it's called the gentleman's art. And or murder yoga is also a thing I've heard it called. I like the gentleman's art. It's pretty cool. But it's very violent, but tactically violent, and very smooth and fluid and beautiful at the same time. When I first had my competition, trained super hard, man. I'd probably say I'm naturally a 185 pound guy. And was training real hard. I was actually competing at the 195 pound weight class. And at 183 pounds at the time, I was fighting some guys way, way bigger than me, which is kind of cool. But I remember the very first match, man. If you know what a gi is, it's that kind of big, heavy, I guess, I don't know how else to call it other than a gi. It is the outfit, per se, that you wear, and it has kind of like a rope-like structure on the collars, and it's kind of baggy sometimes, and this guy's in particular was, and I had essentially done a takedown where it's called a collar drag, but I grabbed the inside collar, and the nuance of this is different grips are supposed to be utilized for different times, and you have to kind of calculate your grip held time because you can get wrapped up like I did. And so I took the guy down, he violently hit the floor, but he spun. And when he spun, my pinky, it got trapped up there and then got kind of rinked out like a sponge. So my pinky ended up becoming 4 pieces at the middle joint of the pinky. So this guy right here, you can kind of see if you're on the camera, it's really not that bad, but it always hurts. It'll never not hurt, which is fine. But if you look, this doesn't look exactly right. Kind of looks weird, kind of bowed in like that, and that's because this is an overcompensation or a hyperextension here at this little mini joint, because this guy can't extend. So it hardly flexes and hardly extends. It's pretty much set in stone. So this guy's really having to compensate. But now I have a nervous tick, a nervous habit where I'll grab this guy and I'll push it and try to stretch it out. It's not going to do anything. It'll never change. But yeah, after that, I ended up winning that match. And I had 2 more matches. Ended up winning those 2 as well. But keep in mind, this is a white belt class, so this means absolutely nothing. But ended up going to the podium with one of the teammates at the time, and we took the gold together. We decided not to compete against each other. I think that's super cool. The Academy does that. But yeah, man, I was super in. I had to get surgery on that pinky. It was kind of a scary one. They actually didn't think I'd keep my pinky for a little bit because it was 4 pieces, all shredded and splintered at the joint. And unfortunately, the pinky, I don't know if you guys knew this, but the pinky and this, your ring finger, but on the right hand, right? Theoretically, it's your ring hand, but the pinky and this finger here, ring finger, they connect kind of to the same muscle throughout your forearm, so they just kind of reach down all the way down here. They actually take up about 60% of your grip strength. So if you were to squeeze as hard as you can, imagine you made a fist and you took these 2 fingers away, ring finger and your pinky finger, and you tried to squeeze as hard as you can, yeah, you only get about 40, maybe 40% of your grip strength. So that was kind of scary. I thought I was going to lose my pinky. I thought, I was going to lose my grip, and that was a big mental little navigation for me. I was kind of scared about it at the time. Surgery went well. The guy who did it was awesome. Don't remember the doctor's name, but cheers. Thanks for fixing me. But that was the first kind of injury I had within jiu-jitsu. Unfortunately, that was I guess that match was in April of 2023. And then had a great year, man. Had a great year. I returned back about 6 months later and started grappling again. And the training was going really well, man. I was really excited. And there was an opportunity to go grapple in Japan, which was super sick. And I was super excited about it. I think I was going to do it. And this was amidst like planning a wedding, and I just got engaged in December. And then in February of 24, I got engaged December of 23, so a few months later, we're already planning a wedding for September of 24. I was in a training accident. Essentially, it's called like posting. You just put your arm on the floor. But I really don't remember how it happened. I just remember it was my weight and another guy's body weight, and I had caught myself from falling. I think what was happening was in jiu-jitsu, there's a lot of groups of people on the floor, and you have to like navigate around those people. And as I was trying to navigate, I was kind of in I had just talked to Felix, my professor, or the owner of the gym at the time. And what happened was I was talking to him about, I was doing a guard pass. So I was like passing someone's guard, and he just instructed me to do it. And so I'm like, I have a guy in my hands. I look up, he gives me a quick nugget. I'm like, great, you do a little guard pass. That was cool. And then as soon as I passed, I kind of got to the end wall and I couldn't move. So I stepped out again. And so we kind of reset. And as soon as we reset, it felt like the other people were getting close to us. And so I started kind of backing away. And as I did that, I think he had gotten my sleeve or something like that. So he held onto my sleeve. And man, when people get a hold of your arms in jiu-jitsu, it's got to be the most annoying thing ever. But as I was moving away from this group, he got my sleeve and kind of did what's called a sweep. And somehow the same arm that he had hold of, I kind of tilted off to the side. He was coming up, and I tried to post with the same arm he had a hold of. And my elbow, if you guys are watching, this is kind of gruesome, and if you looked on Instagram, there's a picture of it, but my hand hit the floor, but my elbow went forward. And then my radius went laterally. So instead of flexing like this, my back of my wrist essentially hit my tricep, so it went backwards. And then this bone here poked out the side. And what happened was, guys, it's called it was a complete dislocation. My radius dislocated from my humerus, and my ulna dislocated from my humerus and my radius. And it was terrible. Tore my UCL and my annular ligament, partially tore my tricep, partially tore my bicep. And I remember when it happened, it's a very strange feeling, my friends. It's the first instinct wasn't pain, actually. My first thought was actually, I don't like that I went there, but it was like a little bit of self-pity. It's like I said, of course. I remember that. And the first thing I thought of was, I have to cancel the wedding. I have to call out of work. And those were the first two thoughts. Unfortunately, I didn't like that. I didn't like that about myself, and I'm glad I actually got to experience that, because that's something I want to navigate. That's not where I want to go mentally when things like that happen. It's not self-pity, but yeah, I was eventually in a lot of pain. One of the teammates there took me to Vanderbilt, where I got to see my fiance at the time, now wife. I got to see her at work, and that was fun. I was wearing a gi, had no shirt on. I'm just got my chest hair out, sweaty. I looked essentially blue, kind of hyperventilating. My arm was hanging off. I was holding on to my arm with the gi, like a finger on the gi. And I just remember one thing. I remember the person at the front desk was like, "Can you sign your name here?" And I was like, "No." Absolutely not. Actually, will you just get me inside, please? There's no way I'm signing this. If I drop my arm, it's going to fall off again. And yeah, so that was cool. I remember sitting there. I remember them getting me into a wheelchair. they cut my gi off. I was super upset about that. I just paid $200 for that. That was very annoying. But eventually they got me in the hospital bed, and I'd been training for a long time, and so I'd been training for about 2 hours. The worst part about the injury of it all, one, my health insurance was going in the day after, so we just got new health insurance, and that health insurance was taking place the day after. Two, it was the very last round of what was like a 2-hour training time. So it was the very last round, and like the very last 60 seconds of that training session that day. As soon as like the class buzzer goes off for class to end, I land on my arm and it explodes. Pretty annoying, actually. But yeah, I'm in the hospital bed. I have a super, super high creatinine level. And I didn't feel comfortable with them giving me ketamine and other drugs because I didn't know how my kidneys would function, and that's maybe naive of me because I didn't quite understand it. But also, like I said, it's kind of hard to explain, guys. The pain, it was so foreign. It was such a foreign pain, a dull feeling of like your bones is kind of flowing in your skin. It was very interesting. But as soon as I kind of reconnected with my breath, I realized like it was simply a feeling. I can't explain it. It's very hard to explain. It wasn't necessarily extremely painful. It was so uncomfortable. And what they had to do was obviously set my arm back in place. Another fun fact, one of the guys who was in my wedding, he's a resident at Vanderbilt for radiology. He actually read the x-rays and texted me. I remember getting a text while I was waiting for the doctors to come back in, and he was like, "What the fuck did you do?" There's only one Bo Crisp in Nashville. What the hell did you do? I know this is you. What did you do to your arm? This is insane. Hilarious. But yeah, they came in. I was so dehydrated that as they were like playing with my arm, that my other arm, if you can see, my other arm was cramping. And so I essentially had like these IVs in, but my arm was cramping so hard. And I couldn't obviously move my other arm, so my arm was cramping to a point where it took 3 people to pry my arm back down. That was maybe the most painful part of it all. My arm cramped so hard it popped the IV out, and I was bleeding everywhere. Disgusting. Very crazy experience. The way they set my arm, guys, is they had 2 people hold onto my chest, 2 people hold onto my arm, and then a person at my shoulder and my other arm. They just kind of pushed me down. I didn't take my ketamine at the time, the painkiller they wanted to prescribe, so they just did like a local thing, and it felt like they essentially just helicoptered my arm until the bones sat into the joint space. That was extremely painful. That was very painful. I put my mouthpiece in and I was like, let's go. So that was my experience as a jiu-jitsu athlete, and that was probably the biggest injury I've had in recent memory. And yeah, I guess that's a good time to get into, man, how did that affect me physically? Well, obviously the annular ligament, the UCL, those are 2 ligaments that you want in your elbow. I mean, if you think about baseball pitchers in particular, they get UCL, Tommy John surgeries all the time, because when you lose that ligament in particular, you lose what's this limiting lateral kind of force. It limits the lateral translation of the elbow. It keeps it in place. So anytime you have like this kind of rotational movement from this direction, it keeps that elbow from flopping around in and out. And so if you push on my elbow hard enough laterally, you can kind of see this bone here will kind of shift just a little bit, and that's very frustrating. The worst part of it all is like the pain and the swelling was extremely complex and very frustrating. The unfortunate part though, guys, is when you get a bone dislocation like that, theoretically, as soon as they reset that bone, is that the joint is functional. It's hard to explain, but my arm was just in half and they reset it, and then theoretically now that joint is purely functional. And this is where we get to get at. It's like, one, let me tell you some of the things I'm having to deal with now. Physically, you guys kind of know the deal. You just go through rehab, and we'll talk about what rehab is. But the emotional component is I have to do this return to play strategy. I have to delay some gratification and truly put myself in the shoes of someone who values the future and can set aside X amount of time to, one, not only get physically ready to return to play, but also the psychological component. When am I ready? Can I do it? Is it worth it? What is the formula of, okay, is this worth it to me? Is this worth it to my life? Does it bring me enough value to risk this potential re-injury, if you will? Because obviously, guys, when you have dislocation injuries in particular, it's extremely likely, especially in those settings like jiu-jitsu, that it'll happen again, or it's way more likely that it'll happen again compared to what it was without. Is it worth it? I love it. You know what? I love the community. For sure. You know, that's the biggest thing I lost. I lost some people, man. Not lost some people, but temporarily, you know, I had some life-giving conversations and friends and coffee time and great memories and laughs, working out together, training together, problem solving together. And then it kind of went from 0 to 100, as in 100% gone. Is it worth it? Like, all these things you have to think about. And for me, I think my mental navigation is this. It's like, yeah, it's worth it. I'll go back when I'm ready. And I think as I get better and more conditioned, I will be. But everyone has to go through that. And that's the hardest part of it all. Pain is extremely, extremely complex because pain is essentially an experience to be had by each person, and it's all individually based. So everyone has to do it. I think people, when they associate pain, it's always negative. However, I think we have a misconception and a poor relationship with it. Just as fitness is a side of the coin where you get to mentally navigate and positively introduce some cool, endorphins and different little chemicals in your body and have this positive expression. It's almost like flowers, you get these sweet flowers that blossom every time you exercise, and it's this very positive note of what is a positive stressor that gives you very positive results. Also the mental aspect of navigation and self-exploration. But pain, injury, it's on the other side of the coin, and what it does is promoting these negative chemicals and these negative feelings and negative circumstances that you also get the opportunity to self-navigate. It's different, but it's necessary. Pain, physical in nature, it's honestly a very good teaching tool for hardship and overcoming circumstances and problem solving. It's even better than that of sometimes, this is a great example of just life in general. You can have someone who has the exact same life growing up. The only difference would be maybe this person lost somebody at the age of 12 and this person hasn't yet done that. The difference in development of people who are able to withstand some more difficult tasks and stress seem to do better afterwards because they have experience dealing with it positively. So people who navigate pain typically have also had either very, very extreme injuries in their past, or they've dealt with some trauma, and they're a bit more equipped. It's a bit more calloused. They're a bit more refined in the art of hardship, and it's kind of hard to put yourself in those shoes unless you've been there. But it's not for naught, if you will. I think when people associate pain and injury, they unfortunately associate them together. And let me tell you guys maybe just the physical nature of what pain is, or maybe the chemical nature. It is signal. It's stimulus, and it starts with your nervous system. And pain is not always indicative of injury or injury presence. Sometimes, there's a book called Your Body Keeps the Score. Very good book. You guys should totally read that. But essentially, this was a question that was asked to me the other day, and this is kind of a way to introduce that question as well as a little Q&A. The question was, is muscle memory a real thing? Certainly. In the nervous system. The muscle memory per se, you have this cross-sectional area that has developed. You've learned how to neurologically control it, so you get all these motor units within it, and then you develop that musculature and systemically turn it on. If you haven't used that musculature in a long time, yes, the cross-sectional area is there, however, it's just not neurologically engaged. You can get that back. That is essentially a very short way of going about explaining that, but this is where it gets interesting. You also have like fascia and all this other tissue with a bunch of little communicators throughout it. And they house a bunch of communicators. If your body keeps the score, well, it's when you guys go through pain or you have experienced something, there's two things that could be going on. One, you've had a trauma in the past, or you have a poor association with the fear or potential presence of pain. So people with knee problems per se, sometimes they seem to be self-diagnosed. It's like almost every single football player and basketball player has patellar tendinopathy or jumper's knee. It's painful and it sucks. I've had it. Almost every athlete has probably had it. However, if we know about like tendons and structure, they all have the ability to go through healing properties. They just require different stimuli. So they found that a lot of isometrics and eccentric contractions that are very high in stimulus and stress, after the bigger muscle groups are taxed, you get the introduction of this viscoelastic tissue, and it essentially starts developing contractions and stimuli of its own and inevitably healing itself. But this is the kicker. Pain-free performance does not exist. And I wish I remembered verbatim what this phrase was that was communicated with me earlier. But pain is just an input. It is just a signal, and you get to kind of navigate that. For instance, knee pain, most of the time it's a symptom, and you can do two things. You can stop doing stuff that hurts it and take some painkillers or ibuprofen, but that is like putting a Band-Aid on an open, gaping wound. The problem is a coordination, mobility, and strength issue. I mean, you guys probably have seen the guy, knees over toe guy, but I mean, what he's saying is not necessarily wrong. Yeah, he's trying to sell some stuff online, but yeah, the basic principle of rehab per se is you are going to find the minimal effective dose and the basic necessary stressor in order to give the tissue a reason to adapt and heal. So whatever the tissue tolerance is at that time, you load it at that tolerance or just below it and start accumulating volume, and then eventually adding more stress and adding more stress and adding more stress until you have what is healing. And in most cases, tissues such as like ligamental and tendon stuff, that's going to take more time than people want. And that is the problem. When we're talking about pain or rehab, and I dare to say rehab because I don't know the legal bounds of saying that, being a CSCS / functional range conditioning mobility specialist, but theoretically, the healing of such, it takes like 6 to 12 months, guys. The problem is people do 2 months of something and they're like, it's just not working. It's like, no, you've actually not moved here. Like the brain itself has not chosen to see its way through. Your association of pain and rehab or strength training will not allow you to proceed to see the benefits of your rehab post 6 to 12 months. It requires stress, and it requires stimulus, and most of the time it requires a little bit of pain. So the association with pain is ultimately, depending on your relationship with pain, it's going to ultimately depend on how well you rehab or kind of improve with some of these nuanced and very annoying issues going on in our physical bodies. And here's a good example. When we first start working out, and this is like as a coach, but I hear it a lot, it's like, oh, that hurts. Ooh, that hurts. It's like, of course, me or any strength coach or any fitness influencer, anybody who's in the fitness and health world before, it's like, what are you talking about? But no, it makes total sense. Your all's perception of pain is this contraction is associated with what is perceived as painful. And you're right, strength training to a point, if I thought back when I first started, yeah, it probably is painful and uncomfortable. It is stress. But once you get past the mental navigation of it, you've now associated pain or working out now as like a muscle contraction and a stimulus or a pump. Some people have called it, as corny as that sounds. So that's just the association of pain. We've changed our relationship with working out pain, of contractions, of muscle lengthening, of the burning sensations. And it all starts with a little bit of repetition and experience, your ability to connect with your breath, and then you have to kind of tell yourself whenever you go into it, like, this is what's happening. So you need a little bit of autonomy. So if you're in that boat and you're in pain, it is the movement problem. It is, okay, what is going on? Is it my brain, my nervous system, sending me a signal to warn me about something that's going on? Is it my body has felt something in the past that felt scary, and now this is the response my body gives to itself when I get in these positions? Does that mean this position is inherently dangerous, or can I navigate this movement problem and build evidence to my body that this can be a good thing? When I first injured my elbow, for instance, remember when I said it had full function? My elbow, my nervous system would not allow me to extend my elbow. I couldn't move it. I could not move it at all. You could get someone who is extremely strong and try to push my elbow down and it would not move. That's muscle guarding. And your nervous system does the same thing. As a matter of fact, mobility, for instance, and this is in particular in the hamstring, especially with the sciatic nerve. But when we build mobility, it is or flexibility, whatever you want in this particular instance, we need to build evidence that these ranges of motions are okay. Like when you guys touch your toes and you get extremely stressed out because when you're going to touch your toes you feel that terrible feeling in the back of your legs, that most of the time is a nervous system response. The odds that our hamstrings have just chronically shortened that much, especially if you're still, like, I would argue within 50 years old, I would say it's just not happened. There is some evidence to suggest that it can happen, and like, sure, but no matter what, they have shown that even with 2 minutes a week, up to 5 minutes a week, that is about the amount of time under tension required to see true lengthening in the tissue itself. So like you actually get longitudinal lengthening of the muscle belly. That is flexibility. But in order to get it, you have to build evidence that that is okay. That's why it requires so much time. And the more time spent in something, the more evidence to your nervous system that those positions are available and tolerable and safe. So that's just the presence of pain or something guarding, right? That's just your hamstring, for example, that feels uncomfortable. That's why you sweat, usually when you stretch your hamstrings. A lot of people do. So anytime you're stretching, find your breath. Anytime you're in pain, take a breath. Ask yourself, what's going on? Why is it doing this? Is this actually an issue? Or can I navigate my way through it? my association and relationship with pain will determine my progress going forward. Knee pain, for example, if you fix mobility in the ankle and in the hips, a lot of the times that pain goes away. Part two of that is if you target the patella tendon and add load with isometrics towards the end of your workout, that will give, hopefully, your knee some lubrication, if you will, to eventually heal that tendon and close the hole in what they call holes in the tendons. They did a study with that this was 2017 for an Olympic lifting / Olympic throwing community. They found holes in the patella tendon. They loaded it with isometrics at very high efforts and very high loads. And they took those isometrics, sustained those efforts 5 minutes a week for 5 months, and they found the holes in the tendon closed, meaning they healed. That's with high efforts. Those are probably 25 to 35-year-olds, so they're still a little bit younger on the scale of age, I suppose, but that's possible. Unfortunately, it does seem like pain is introduced like it's a medical problem, and I don't think that's true. I think, well, if we know, a lot of us do, the painkillers and the drugs are just things to give you instant gratification and temporary satisfaction of healing something. It's the Band-Aid, right? The true fix for you guys with pain in particular is going to be restoring movement, optimal movement, good movement, and then subtly improve strength training, and then your coordination, all of which should be included in a good quality strength and conditioning program. But the thing is, like, you have the tools, especially with a good strength and conditioning program. And like, you would never there's a good example. I think Kelly Starrett said this. He essentially was like, you would never have someone come into your home to change a light bulb, or you would never have someone you would never charge someone to change a simple tire, right? You would never have them come out there. That's because it's basic maintenance. And the basic maintenance is like, if you have the tools to just take care of your body, well, that is your structure, right? Your body is a physical structure with a bunch of like very intricate and special things that are attached to certain things to make sure it all functions like a freaking sports car, man. It's all very particular, and it needs to be dealt with. It needs to be lubricated and properly maintained, just like any high-level sports car. You are the Ferrari, right? And as a coach, I'm your driver, right? If I'm given a Ferrari and I am to drive it, well, the best thing I can do is not wreck the car, so I give it what it needs. So, you've heard my story, and I explained the process of my rehabilitation journey. That's been introducing small stressors that helped that my body was physically able of doing at the time. It first started with 2 fingers, right? I was flexing, extending without my arm moving hardly at all. Part 2 of that, guys, is if you are in pain or you're dealing with an injury, global movement is the answer. You need your lymphatic system to get fluid pushed and distributed throughout the body. That's your oil filter, right? That has to happen, because if you don't, then the area at play swells, and swelling inhibits things from happening, good things from happening. So, when I had my elbow injury, first thing I did was I made sure it wasn't going to fall off. 1, 2, got on stair climber, man. 20, 30 minutes every single day at a very low stress rate. Getting like quality just blood flow and lymphatic drainage and drinking a load of water, man, as much as I possibly could, and introducing the global movement. If you have one leg that doesn't work, why on earth is the rest of why are we gonna suffer? My leg's an extremity. It hurts like hell, but my right leg can get stronger, my left arm can get stronger, my right arm can get stronger, and my heart for damn sure can get stronger. In addition to that, when I move those things, I get global healing and global tissue response and global fluid and nutrients distributed throughout my body, that's important. A lot of people, for some reason, oh, I don't feel good today, my knee hurts, I'm going to cancel, today's session. It's like, why? Move or expire, The less I move my knee, the more it's going to be delayed in healing, because when I'm not moving, that swelling's just building up, inhibiting the healing properties from happening. My inflammation's just going to increase in that spot, and now I have just a ton of just negativity happening to it, and my global body is not benefiting from any movement at all. And the worst part, my psychology is going down the drain. That's the hardest part, guys. The psychology. And we're about to get into that. But everyone's going to have an ailment. Everyone has dealt with some form of back issue. Everyone's going to have some pain down the road. The truth is, there's not really an excuse to not do strength training, and there's not really an excuse to not move in some capacity. The only excuses that are allowed are just the ones that you essentially justified and found a way to navigate, and you found a reason or justification to do nothing. That is the only way that works, is if you somehow convince yourself that nothing is okay. And that's wrong. There are moments in time to do nothing, but that doesn't mean you stop moving. Doing nothing and resting, those two can happen. That's rest, that's active, that's movement, right? I choose rest. I'm going to give my soul some rest, I'm going to give my body some rest. That's important. What happens when you're up at 10 a.m. and you've already rested, and now you're just sitting down staring at the phone, and your body's just accumulating this lymphatic tissue, this lymphatic fluid at the injured site, and we're just choosing to do nothing about it. Don't know what to say there. Staying on the physical aspect of all of this, the whole point of my elbow rehab was I had to just essentially find a good relationship of stress and recovery. Just like working out in general, but with rehab for my elbow, for example, I had to balance, okay, how much can I withstand today? Let's find out. So sometimes I'd push it too hard, and I'd have to recover a little bit. So one day I'd have an elbow-specific rehab day, next day I have a global movement and little self-exploration day, right? I'd make sure my elbow, the specific job site, if you will, is healed, and then I can get back to it the day following the global movement day. So it's not that I'm not training my elbow, but it has specific days that it can rehab while I go do other things. Eventually I added just a little bit more load, and the tissue got a little bit stronger. 6 months in, I started adding a little bit of weight to it, and then I made sure to restore full function first. So it's like, okay, well, you restore almost in any rehab setting, I believe, and just strength and conditioning in general, you want to make sure that you restore function and have proper function first, then you can load it. It's just like a house and building a foundation. You don't want to put a house on rocky or clay foundation, right? Something that's just going to go by the wayside if something bad happens. Restore function. Get proper function, and be very diligent and almost vicious about it. I'm going to restore this function. Then I'll start loading it. And when I start loading it, then you have the muscles and ligaments and stuff pulling on the muscle and the skeleton to move that joint, and then load it from many angles. And so for my elbow, I just introduced stress. I recovered. I introduced new angles and different stimuli, and then I changed it, and I recovered. And then I added more weight, and I recovered. And I just did that through multiple ranges of motion, through different planes of movement, meaning transverse, frontal, or sagittal, meaning twisting left and right or forward and back. And I did that until I got to where I'm at now, which is actually the strongest I've ever been. So almost just in over a year, I took my elbow with probably 70% of my tricep and about 70% of my bicep and no ligaments. I am, I think, the strongest I've ever been. So I just want you guys to know, as far as the physical nature goes, it's possible, man. You guys can do it. It takes a lot of work and effort It's very difficult. It's very difficult. It was very hard. Little nuggets for you guys when it comes to mitigating pain, momentary pain. The RICE thing, the rest, ice, compress, elevate, that was redacted, I believe, by the guy in like 2014. And then most studies show, and I can post these studies if you guys would like, most studies show that it is C tier as far as progression in the rehabilitation and strength training world goes. And the number one method of healing is actually full functional range strength conditioning. So joint function, loading it, mechanical stress, and ranges of motion, planes of movement, all those things. So don't ice. What happens is when you ice, you reduce inflammation at we'll say the healing site. When you ice at the healing site, you take the inflammation that is there it's essentially there as a healing property. Without inflammation, there is no healing property. So when you ice it, you just blunt it. You just take it away. And so you're actually delaying the healing. Like I said earlier, when you elevate and don't move, although some of those things I'm sure are fine, but even if you're elevating, man, you're pumping that ankle, you're doing something. Here's why. When you don't move, you just get the lymphatic system from stopping. Like it just stops distributing fluid. And so now, and this is why they make you move in the hospital and other rehabilitation areas, but when you stop moving and you just have swelling, that causes very different and bad complications to healing areas and different chronic diseases and chronic issues. Like, you want the swelling gone. You have to move. You have to move. And when you stop moving and you're icing, you're delaying healing processes and you're just increasing the amount of fluid built up in that specific area. It's very painful. I don't like it. Don't do it. The next one that we're going to talk about, I'm only going to touch on a little bit because I think I might do a full encompassing psychological approach to this, but the emotional component to pain, rehabilitation, and the return to play is by far the most complicated. And everything I've talked about to this point, I just want you guys to know that actually, when we think about pain, the general idea is that no one really understands. And I think that's because it's incredibly personal to the person that has it. I cannot tell you what pain you are experiencing because your pain has been psychologically developed and you've built a relationship about how you deal with the presence of pain or the potential of, based on your own life experiences and the sports you've played or the sports you haven't played or the people you've lost in your life, etc., etc. Those things I cannot identify with, but I can empathize for you in this. It's like we've all experienced pain in different ways, and we all have our own explorative way to deal with this problem. I know that the general nuance of this physical rehabilitation has the truths of, in order to mitigate symptoms, you really have to look at the problem, and we have to deal with coordination, true function / mobility, and then strength. Those are what matters, right? Build tissue tolerance. You want to exceed the demand of life in order for the tissue to be prepared for just the life demands, right? So strength training, if we're wanting to pick up a 50-pound bag of sand, you should be able and train at 75 pounds, right? You're carrying a 75-pound sandbag because I have prepared you for the demands of your sport, which is your life. That's how strength training works. If you have a 16-pound baby, which is a big old baby, if you have a 16-pound baby, carry a 35-pound weight, because I have exceeded the demand of carrying that big old baby. But like I said, the emotional component is the relationship aspect of it too. How do you deal with it? How do you deal with the idea of what if this is it? This was asked me by a good friend of mine. How do you deal with an injury psychologically? and it really messed with you because your return to play probably is non-existent. You might not perform the same. A lot of people don't, especially with really, really bad injuries. And that's because you go through what was very you. You've had your bodies for so long. Let's say I'm sprinting one day, and then one day I just tear my hamstring. Well, you just tore your hamstring. That's a very painful injury. And that is a global, systemic, painful injury. The first time I pulled mine in a very bad way, I threw up. It's a very big muscle, very painful. So, the things you lose some people around you. You lose the camaraderie of your group. You lose a little bit of your identity and who you are as an athlete or a person within the sport you play, right? There's an identification issue going on. There is the non-gratifying time requirement that can go anywhere from 2 to 18 months, right? How do you deal with the process of time? That's endurance, right? Time compounded with mindful rumination, delaying gratification. Didn't mean to rhyme there. But you get the idea. You not just did you lose the ability to go play and get admiration for what you do. If you're playing football, for instance, you are admired by those around you. You're this gangster on the field, right? You're this stud who is in shining armor of this badass football helmet and the cool shoulder pads and the cleats, and you look the part and you perform the part, and it's a way to espouse your strengths and virtues and all these things that you're very proud of, and then it gets taken away from you. How do you deal with that? The thing that was filling your cup was the emotional, potentially dysregulation, right? You were emotionally being filled with admiration and kind words and good lucks and wow, that's so cool, or all the likes on Instagram and on your social media pages, and you're in with the cool kids. Then all of a sudden, like, the injury happens, and if you're in the sport, if you're in the team sport realm, well, next man up. That sucks. Because you go from the guy to all of a sudden the guy just took your place. Next man up. How do you deal with that? That's painful. That's a completely different relationship of pain. We cannot understand or we cannot understand each other's personal relationships with pain. We can empathize with the fact that we understand that things are hard in their own ways. Some people value that gratification from other people more. So how do you approach that? What do you do? Well, the first thing is, as a strength coach / someone who got to study sports psychology very heavily, and it was tested on, especially in the CSCS, but also I got to talk to guys like Brian Kane and Dr. Blanton back at the University of Tennessee. How do you psychologically approach someone who's dealing with injury, the return to play? Well, one, you have to reestablish, maybe potentially rework a good relationship with the athlete, or myself, for example, with my elbow. My issue is identification. Okay, I went from athlete to guy that I see, and I'm espousing the physical qualities of what I really love to see in men, which is physical prowess, and then articulation, and then fancy, fluid, artistic movement, and that's gone. I need a better relationship with myself. What's my identification issue? Well, I see too much value in just physical hardship. Where's the meaning? I need to find meaning in my work. Then, for me, when I get back into jiu-jitsu, I now have a clearer picture of what's important. What's important is my wife, my home, my dog, my physical body, the people around me, my relationships, and all those who I want to help. So a clear picture on who you are and what your value is ultimately most important. Part 2 of that, how do you put the psychological aspect of just putting pressure back on, let's say, a broken foot? Well, that is the cool thing about the rehabilitation thing, and any good physical therapist will do this, but they just generate the evidence. They meet you where you're at, they build evidence that these ranges of motion are okay, and they push you to, I would say, painful experiences, and they push you through a little bit of pain, and so that way you actually get to mentally navigate what's acceptable, what's attainable, and what's not. And if you have a decent associate with your breath, your ability to reconnect and say, this is a feeling, and this is just a stimulating input, and this is not necessarily something that's going to get worse, it's just a feeling. If I can develop that relationship through my breath, I'm way more likely to deal with a little bit higher stimulating doses of pain, which inevitably probably yields you a better rehabilitation outcome. So, I have fixed or helped my identification thing. I have created a more healthy way of approaching, this is me, a more healthy way of approaching where my meaning is coming from, my identification issue. I now am slowly building the evidence that the actual function itself, the actual joint, can take the demands on which I'm implementing it. And then the hardest question is, am I ready to go back? Part of that, and this is the hardest part, the evidence can only take you so far in the rehab/strength and conditioning setting. And this is so complex, guys, that I think I will probably have a completely different podcast over it, because I don't think I can touch on all the intricate. I'm trying to keep this manageable. It is very hard to explain the psychological aspects of return to play when we get to this point, because there's a lot of nuance that goes behind it. If you're a team guy and you're on a football team and you're dealing with hamstring injuries, how do you know you're ready? Well, that kind of goes into ego. And usually athletes with higher levels of ego are more likely to confidently probably step back on the field. Sometimes that's to a fault. You'll see that a lot. You'll see people who are unprepared to return to play, and they will get injured again because they weren't ready. And that's on not just the athlete, but usually the team. The team sets them up to fail. The team maybe gasses them up too much or cares too much about the game outcome and less about the player's outcome, right? They'll overwork them. Part 2 of that is sometimes they're extremely ready and the tissue is extremely ready and the function is there, but the player just can't get over the boundary of what if it happens again. And that is a question of, is it worth it? Jiu-jitsu. Is it worth it? Can I do it? These are questions I'm asking myself to this day, right now, asking myself in front of you guys. Can I do it? Is it worth it to me? Are the people in my life worth to keep around those guys and gals who are in that badass facility? Well, the easy answer is fuck yeah. The hardest part is convincing myself I'm ready. I think I'm ready. But if you listen to this podcast, especially when I first started, there is a problem that we can explore here. And it is the door. And what I can do is I can foresee myself in the potential and who I want to be. Do I want to be a man who quits? Do I want to be a well-grounded man? Who do I want to be on the other side of that door? When I have those answers, I have to step through it. But I also have to know that whenever I step through it, what is behind me, behind the door that I just stepped through, that threshold, can no longer stay with me. And so for me, when I choose to step through that door or make an official decision on whether or not I continue this cool little journey of craftsmanship and sport, or choose that there is another calling for me and there's another way to find meaning in my own physical prowess and exploration, and how I choose to show myself to the world through my physical nature. Is my energy being put where it needs to be? Is my meaning correct? Is it worth it? If I step through it and I make those decisions, I have to confidently say that the person who was behind that, the guy who couldn't make the decision yet, I have to leave that behind and just make a very confident decision. It's a really cool navigation of mine, and I'm in no rush. I'm in no rush at all. Not at all. Because my timeline will forever be different than your all's. And that's okay. Guys, if you're dealing with pain, if you are dealing with pain, take a breath. If it's physical, in nature, we know that just systemically and physically that tissue kind of works the same. It's essentially, okay, don't treat the symptom, treat the problem. The problem is usually rooted in function, coordination, and strength. When I have those, I build what is called tolerance, and those tissues get stronger, and I should train eventually at stressors that exceed the demands of life or the sport. When I do that, my body is well prepared for those stressors and demands. Pain-free performance does not necessarily exist. Almost every professional lifter is experiencing pain. Almost every professional athlete is experiencing pain. However, the relationships with those folks are probably a little bit better with pain because they have experience in dealing with it and navigating problems. The best athletes are also the best compensators. We are also athletes, the general pop, the non-professionals. If you have a body, you are an athlete. So, we get to train. That is what strength training is. We're not just working out. We are deciding and figuring out how to navigate our own physical bodies so that way we can perform in our lives. We will train at levels and stressors that exceed the demands of our lives so that way when we go out into this world, we perform well. I can carry my grandkids. I can pick up heavy-ass rocks and put them out for cow, right? If you are an athlete and you are or post-athlete, and you're dealing with maybe the nuance of like being burdened by the injury that could not get you to the next level. Well, you've learned for a very long time that being the athlete provides you tons of value, and it does. However, the meaning to your life is greater than that, and how you come out into the world and decide to put your meaning, you get to affect people in very positive light. You have the chance to do that. And you get to use maybe what I just used and explain to people how hard it can be, especially athletes. How hard it can be to be burdened by the fact maybe an injury really prevented you from pursuing the next chapter of your story. It happens all the time. We are, by nature, human beings. And it's not this, guys. It's not you're dealt with a deck of cards. No, you're a human being that has billions and billions of cells and different organs and systems that operate, and everyone is so individual that we cannot assume ourselves to be the same as someone else. It can't happen. I grew up differently than you. My family dynamic was different than yours. My physical and mental and endurance, we'll say trauma, is different than yours. Yours is different than mine. And we get to navigate ourselves through this process. Remember, pain is just on the other side of fitness. It is, you have the positive aspect of exploration and stimuli where you're getting all the cool benefits of pushing your muscles and getting some of these chemical excretions through your body. And then pain is like the stress. It is the stress response. It's not chosen, it's implemented to you, and it's yielding or promoting the negative aspects of that. Cortisol, I don't even know the other issues besides inflammation, your nervous system going haywire, and a lot of swelling. That's very uncomfortable. Both of which provide us opportunities to figure out what it is we want to do through these problems. At the end of the day, everything is a chance for a little bit of perspective and self-exploration. And I read this. No one will be a professional in self-exploration because we need to be PhDs in it. And we are expected to be, because that is life. That's what it's about. We are all expected to be PhDs in our own lives. I cannot tell you how to self-explore, but I can tell you the physical tools, the spiritual and fitness tools that I have experienced, and to give you guys just an idea of how to get there yourselves. And by the way, I hope this doesn't come off the wrong way to other people speaking about it, but no one actually knows everything. And most people don't have it figured out. And most people are continuing their journey on the learning process. For me, fitness has been the grounding tool. The nutrition has been the implement to help heal and restore my body. And then I get to use my experiences with some of my misfortunes in my life, losing my father, my grandfather, my grandmother, some of these folks in my life, some of the injuries I've had in my lifetime. I get to take these experiences and tell you guys how it is I've gotten to the point where I'm at. In addition, I am a professional in the strength and conditioning world. I get to tell you guys how it is I use these tools along with the physiology and stuff like that. So, let's sum it up. We have associated pain with a medical condition, most of which is maintenance that can be implemented by us. We have the tools, and if you don't, then just tune in and just ask questions. Treat the problem, not the symptom. Restore function of your joints and other tissues. Load it with some stressors like strength training, and remember to find your coordination within it. Pain is complex. No one quite understands it. However, it does seem that the more you get more accustomed to finding yourself with your breath, taking a moment to think about where it is you are in the moment within your pain, you get to explore yourself a little bit more. It's all about the relationship you have with yourself, your experiences, and repetitions. The more repetitions you get, particularly in the strength and conditioning world and in fitness, the more pages you have in your textbook to refer back to when things arise that could be either legitimately painful or it's your nervous system that is responding a certain way, and you get to rebuild evidence that some of these functions are okay. If something is painful and you have found that maybe anatomically, such as a spondy or a stenosis, inflection or extension of your spine does cause pain, that is a movement problem that we get to navigate and figure out how it is we can move our body elsewhere. Because when in doubt, the global approach is most important. We need to move, we need to be healthier. If you are experiencing a limb, my elbow, the rest of my body should not suffer. The global approach helps move tissue or fluid away from the tissues, allowing for some of that inflammation to heal. If you need to ice momentarily to reduce pain, that's great. However, that's not going to help you heal quicker. Eventually, the inflammation needs to be there to heal. And then Rice was redacted in 2014. So, if ice baths, for example, give you benefit and you feel like it provides you a ton of value as a person, you should do it. However, it is not helping you heal, and it has been proven that it is inhibiting a lot of muscle growth and other tissue response. So, with that being said, guys, we're all in this together. Pain is super complex. Maybe I'll get into the emotional aspect of it, but it is your personal experience. And if you want the strength and conditioning and fundamental tools on how to approach it, step by step, joint by joint, systematically, we can do that. The psychological approaches, I think it really takes your breath. I think we need to find where it is we're placing our value. I think we need to build evidence that the structure's okay. And then I think eventually we'll just have to navigate what is the hardest question of it all is this worth it? Can I do this? And do I want to prove myself that I can do this? And is that of value to me? These are all questions that we have to answer, unfortunately, for ourselves. And I'm all about it. It's badass. Guys, this was episode 11, Buried in the Bones podcast. Pain and return to play. It's complex, man. But we have to go onwards. Cheers, my friends. See you guys next week.